Hello everyone! Welcome to Story Time again, coming to you live from the Milledgeville Public Library, where the stuffed animals have been behaving themselves. They said they had a party 2 days ago, but they cleaned up after themselves, so that was very nice of them. The story we have for you today comes from the Native American tradition, and it comes from the Pueblo people of the Native American tradition, so the people that live in the southwestern part of the United States. This is the story of the ants that pushed on the sky. Once long ago, in the land of the Pueblo, there lived a young man. He was a very good hunter, and he was also a wizard. He had some control over the clouds in the sky. And his name was Kaptuuyu. I think I said that right. It means cornstalk young man, and we're going to keep calling him that so that I don't keep saying his name wrong. Well, cornstalk young man, like I said, was a very good hunter, and he would go out hunting about once a week and bring home game for his family so they would have some meat to eat. He had his mother and his father and his two sisters. Well, cornstalk young man also had a young man who was a friend of his, or so he thought. And that young man was also a wizard, but he kept his powers hidden. Well, one day, the two young men went out to hunt together, and they saw a herd of deer, and cornstalk young man followed part of the herd one way, and his friend followed part of the herd the other way. And at the end of the day, as they usually did, they came together and they met underneath an old tree in the forest. And usually what they would do then is they would go and gather some firewood so that they could take their food back to the village and their families could cook it on the firewood. Well, when cornstalk young man arrived back at the tree that day, his friend was already waiting and he didn't have a deer, but cornstalk young man did. And cornstalk young man, being a very kind young man, he said, we should share my deer. Here, you take part of it, and I will take part of it, and then our families will both have something to eat. But his friend was a little bit proud, and he said, no, thank you. I didn't catch anything. You caught that, so you take it home, and I'll just find something else. All right, so they gathered their firewood, and they went home. And when they got home, cornstalk young man's sisters said, oh, our brother is such a mighty hunter. He has brought us home the deer. Good job, brother. But his friend's family did not praise him, for they had no food. The next week, cornstalk young man and his friend went out hunting again. And again, cornstalk young man came home with the deer, but his friend did not. And the next week, it happened exactly the same way. Well, by the fourth week, cornstalk young man's friend was rather jealous. And when they came back together at the end of the fourth time they went hunting, cornstalk young man again had a deer and his friend did not. And his friend said, I don't think you're my friend anymore. I think you're keeping all the deer for yourself and you're not sharing them with me. I can't do any hunting if you're scaring them all away. I don't think you're my friend. And cornstalk young man said, but I am your friend. How can I prove to you that I'm your friend? And his friend said, well, you see that tree that we meet under? Did you see the tree? There's a branch on the tree that came up like this and then came straight across. And he said, I want you to climb up on that tall branch up there and sit on top of it and pretend it's a horse. Ride it like a horse. And he said, well, all right then. And so he climbed up the tree and he got up on that branch and he rode it like a horse. But his friends used his magic to make that tree branch grow taller and taller and taller and taller until it grew so tall that you couldn't see it anymore. And poor cornstalk young man was just holding onto the branch for everything he had so he wouldn't fall off. Well, when he had finished making that branch grow tall, his supposed friend picked up the deer the cornstalk young man had caught and took it back to his family. Well, the problem with this is Cornstalk Young Man was stuck up there in the branch, and he couldn't get back down. It was too high. But he was the one who called down the rain onto the crops and for the animals and for the people in his village. And if he wasn't there, then the rains didn't come. And when the rains don't come, the crops dry up. And when the crops dry up and the ponds shrink, then the animals and the people don't have enough water to drink, and they get weak and they start to die. And that's exactly what happened. First, the crops turned yellow in the fields and the animals started to get a little weaker. And then the crops turned brown in the fields and the animals started to fall down because they were so weak, because they were so thirsty. And the people in the villages weren't able to do their work anymore, and they started to get weaker, and some of them started to die. Well, Cornstalk Young Man's family said, this is not good. We need to do something about this. And so they went out of the village, and his father, Old Black Cane, went south, and his mother, Corn Woman, went east, and the older sister, Blue Corn Maiden, went north, and the younger sister went west. And they started looking for Cornstalk Young Man. He had to be there somewhere. Well, as she was moving north, his sister, Blue Corn Maiden, heard a song. It was very faint, but she thought she heard the singer say, Old Black Cane is my father, and Corn Woman is my mother. And she recognized the voice of her brother. And so quickly she called back to her family, and they all came, and they could hear the singing too. And so they followed the sound of the singing until they got to the bottom of that old tree. And at the bottom of the old tree, they found Cornstalk Young Man's bow, and they found his arrows, and they found the bundle of firewood tied up with a rawhide thong, like he usually did when he brought it home. But no matter where they looked, they couldn't find him anywhere. And so they gathered together, and this is so sad, but we can't find him. Where is he? Well, I suppose we'll just have to go home. And so they did. They went home. Very sad, because they knew that they thought that maybe they wouldn't see him again, ever. And that was very sad. About this time, there was a little black ant, and it lived at the bottom of that big old tree with its whole family. And that little black ant decided he was going to go on an adventure. He was going to climb that tree all the way from the bottom, all the way up to the tippy top of that tree. And so he did. And much to his surprise, when he got up to the tippy top of that tree, he found Cornstalk Young Man up there. And he said, Cornstalk Young Man, what are you doing here? All of your people are down on the ground, and they're all dying because there's no rain, and the crops are drying up, and they're thirsty, and why are you up here? And Cornstalk Young Man said, well, I got stuck. I was tricked into climbing this tree, and then the person I thought was my friend made it grow really tall, and now I'm stuck up here, and I'm starving. Because he'd been up there for so long with no food. And the little black ant said, I think I can do something about that. And so he scurried back down to the bottom of the tree, and he sent out word to all of the little black ants and all of the big red ants to come to the tree and help. And so they all climbed up the tree, and all the big red ants climbed up and made a big line up the tree. And when they all let off, there weren't enough of them left, then the little black ants joined in, and they made a line up the rest of the tree. And they took an acorn cap, and they filled it with cornmeal and water and honey, and they passed it up the tree, up the chain of ants, all the way up to the tippy top, where they gave it to Cornstalk Young Man to drink. And he drank it, And then like magic, it filled up again, and he drank some more, and he drank some more, and he drank some more until he wasn't thirsty and he wasn't hungry anymore. And then he said, "Thank you, my friends, but now I have to figure out how to get down from here." And the little black ant said, "I think we can help with that too. Close your eyes, Cornstalk young man, and don't open them until I say, 'Ow!'" So he did. He closed his eyes, and he held on tight to the tree. And all of those little black ants at the top of the tree, they got on their backs and they pushed against the sky with their feet as hard as they could. And they kept pushing and pushing all the way down the line, pushing and pushing and pushing until they had moved that branch about a quarter of the way back to the earth. And the little black ant said, "Ow!" And Cornstalk young man opened up his eyes and he looked around. "I can't see the earth yet. Did it work? Is it working?" And the little black ant said, "Close your eyes again. We'll try again." So he closed his eyes again. And they pushed and they pushed and they pushed on the sky. And then the little black ant said, "Ow!" And Cornstalk young man opened his eyes. "Well, I can see the brown fields." "Okay, close your eyes. We'll try again." So they closed their eyes. And they pushed 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 on the sky. And the little black ant said, "Ow!" And Cornstalk young man opened his eyes and he said, "Well, I can see my village. Oh, and I can see the animals lying in the fields because they're so thirsty. But it's still too high." And little black ant said, "Close your eyes again." So he closed his eyes again, and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed on the sky. And this time, when the little black ant said, "Ow!" and Cornstalk young man opened his eyes, he could see that if he just let go of the branch and hung by his hands, he could just land very softly on the earth. And so he did that. And he said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friends, wonderful ants, little black and big reds. Here, let me get you something so that you will be able to feel strong again, because you must be feeling very tired from pushing on the sky so hard." And so he found a deer and he killed the deer for them so that they could get their strength back. And then Cornstalk young man made a flute out of a piece of a reed, and he started blowing on the flute and playing a very pretty tune and a very happy song. And suddenly the clouds that were up in the sky opened up and let out all of the rain, and it started pounding down onto the fields and onto the people's house roofs. And the people were so surprised to hear the rain because they hadn't heard the rain in so very long. And so they went outside and they looked, and it was raining, and the fields were turning green, and the animals were getting up on the fields, and people were starting to feel better because it was raining and they could drink water again. And so they all went running out of the fields, running out of their houses, for they could hear the music coming as Cornstalk young man walked back to the village. And they all went running out to greet him, and they were so excited to see him again. And when they got back to the village, they found all of their storehouses were filled to the top with corn and grain and all sorts of good things to eat. And so they had a big feast to celebrate the fact that Cornstalk young man had come back to them and brought the rain. As for his false friends, he died of shame in his house, and no one cried because he was gone. And that is the story of the ants that pushed on the sky from the Pueblo people in the United States, or the area that is now the United States. So next week, on Monday, we will have another story for you. I don't know what story it's going to be. It'll be a surprise. So you'll have to tune in on Monday at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time here on the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois Facebook page and find out what story we're going to be telling. I hope you enjoyed today's story. We'll see you all later. Have a good weekend. Bye.